I'm going to be using ion propulsion and ion diamagnetic propulsion. My idea is to to apply the copper cylindrical within this cylindrical tube within this cylindrical aluminum, and apply the bismuth and silicon powder within the copper rod cylindrical, and stuff it into this aluminum, and add an iron rod within it, and that will be the bus rod. We add the capacitor here to this system. Apply the capacitors here to add it into the Pellettier effect system to cooler, and then apply a rod down there so to electrocute the liquids. But the rod that's in there is going to be coming from there, and it's going to be centered here. In the plasma, the rod is going to be two ways to as a T rod, and that rod will sink right into here and connect directly to the capacitor. The capacitor is the rod is connected directly within here to the Pellettier effect compound, which is bismuth and silicon. And the copper rod that is the cylindrical copper rod that is housing the bismuth and silicon. And over the copper rod shall be this aluminum rod. And I'm going to wrap a winding coil around it. The electrical energy that I receive from the current that is flowing in there should cause the Pellettier effect to the rod. Nevertheless, the ions that are engaging within the cylindrical aluminum tube diamagnetic will cause the copper rod to try to escape, or the aluminum to try to escape from the magnetic field. So both of them will try to escape from each other, but the exchange of escaping is going to be carried by carrying the inertial weight of its mount. So both of them are going to be on the side. I'm going to use that to boil the water to set it to here inside of this housing so that the liquid can be cool. I'm going to close the nozzles so that it can bleed. But the plasma rod, the arc rod, the rods near these rods are going to be, even though I'm going to add two of them and zigzag it, so that the displacement is both areas from top and bottom. So the rod is a T rod that is split to two separate rods that are 1 and 2. So when the T rod comes, that's one iron rod, where the positive and negative is going to be on both sides. And that's going to force the exertion this way and exertion this way to cross the course dual action displacement. And over here to a dual action displacement of this faceplate. And this faceplate is pure aluminum. And there's the cylindrical tube of pure aluminum. Here is the power source that I'm using, and attach it within the system. So I'll be right back. I'm also going to use a pump. I'm probably going to use a pump, a micro pump. Now this is a micro pump, this is a micro pump. And this small little solenoid closed micro pump pumps a little bit of air, 90 psi. I think this is 40, or I think it's 40 psi's per square inch. But I wouldn't need that to pump it, but just in case I'm going to use it, I don't need to pump it when I'm boiling the liquid, and sending it to the cylindrical, so I could have some kind of force on bladdering out of the nozzle that I'm going to choke the nozzle. But the ions are going to be flowing through there, so it's like partly steam and the ice that is going to be created by the Pellettier module. So partly steam and partly ion thrust. So it should be able to carry it into the air. I'm Mr. Morton. Goodbye. Okay, so what I did was I add the iron rods into the cylindrical, in the shaft of the aluminum. The rod stop right here and is pointed directly at the aluminum tip, the copper tip, bearing on the aluminum. This is an iron enclosure, and as far as the rods, they're iron. So the current carried through here strikes against the the copper. The plasma fires against the copper. However, the plasma within the aluminum housing cylindrical. Now there's iron on the outside, whereas I'm going to be using plastic, wax sheet paper, and I'm going to add a winding coil around it like a solenoid sense. So that's going to allow the linear motion of this object. The idea is I'm going to be using also the solenoid coil. I'm going to be using single-phase diode rectifiers for both ends, the face point of the coil, the helix coil. And that's going to be spun around this iron. The iron is going to be magnetized and going to repulse against the aluminum. Now the copper is similar to the aluminum. The electron's plasma is going to be filled within the cylindrical. Not only, but the winding coil outside, the winding energy, electrical energy, is going to cause diamagnetic repulsive force. It's going to force away the electrostatic field diamagnetic cylindrical, where it's going to move the entire housing facility. And this engine is going to be coupled to the armor, to the faceplate. The faceplate is going to bear these alongside of the faceplate. So while it turns to a noodle form of shape, moving and exerting electrical energy up and downward. So the repulsive force is static, and I can switch between channels of the current. So I can send current down to move it up, and I can send current up to move it down. And inside of here, inside of the cylindrical, I have permanent magnets. And to show you that I have permanent magnets, I'm trying to touch the part that is magnetized. Let me get a bigger piece of metal. I think that's aluminum. See, so I have permanent magnets inside of here, along with the iron rod. And the Palantir effect is supposed to also be in here. It's supposed to stuff it with the compounds for silicon and bismuth. Now the silicon compound, I'm looking to see where I placed it at. And the bismuth, it's not localized, new local tubing. So I'll have to come back at that and show you that later. But this is how the engine works. Okay, this is the Electron Engine that I created. In here is iron rod. The housing is aluminum, and the tips are copper. Copper is localized inside here. The iron rod is in here. It establishes a charge. A charge is generated with a capacitor. And the capacitor, the current carrying, has a spark gap between the copper and the iron rod that is in the cylindrical housing of aluminum, and it fires against it. And the capacitor will bond for one part for the phase wires here, and the other part for the anode is here. So the cathode and the anode phase wire for the spark gap within the aluminum. The idea is to allow the electrical energy, electrostatic, to build up, which is more in paramagnetic particles, thus electrostatic more than the winding energy, electrical winding energy of the induction coil. Now I have a winding coil that's wrapped 3 times within the system, and over the aluminum is a metallic cylindrical. The iron cylindrical gets magnetized, increases the copper coil. This is similar to diamagnetic repulsive force actuator, like a linear actuator. So depending on the faceplate of the wire, it'll cause it to move left or right, left or right. So because I have turns in here, which are consecutive, and to magnetize the iron rod, nevertheless I have permanent magnets within here. So the idea is to cause the linear motion of the cylindrical rod, which is coupled to the faceplate, where it's fixed alongside the faceplate, like along the side. This is where the 2 rods have 2 spur gaps, the phase left or right or up and down, and they are localized within the faceplate, fixed in an area to where they can exert from the side of the faceplate and from the bottom of the faceplate for diamagnetic propulsion. And being that this coil is going to be synchronized, I'm going to be using a single-phase rectifier and a capacitor bypass to the wire. And I put 2 single-phase rectifiers at the end, so it can only go one direction. So therefore, when the current charges the system by using another terminal of a DC phase coil to synchronize this coil, and it causes the electrical energy, winding energy, to charge the capacitor, so that it increases in voltage and maintains the voltage back and forth, while the winding energy occurs for a diamagnetic repulsive force, because the weight to be more than the weight of the cylinder and more than the weight of the inertial mass, so that it may cause the currents may cause motion between and movement against the inertial mass and gravitational mass. So the idea is to create a diamagnetic linear engine that is also moved as a self-moving actuator. So I applied it into the system, like 2 of them, to emit separate ions from this way and this way. My name is Martin, and see you next time. Okay, the capacitor faceplate is cut out from a sheet, that aluminum sheet, that is zigzagged and placed with a template over it, allowing the turns to be at both ends at the length of the template edges. So the long side can't be cut as to shrink and reduce the size. And the cuts in place can also be done for the eye sockets, etc. But the zigzag cut is made first. After this is done, accomplished, then it is separated, unleashed, unfolded, which creates consecutive masses or consecutive cutouts in series, and then wax sheet paper is placed over both sides of this aluminum, and then the other segment of the aluminum is then laid upon one surface of the wax paper, having the other aluminum under it, and the following wax paper goes on top of that aluminum that is spread out and then laid over the wax sheet paper. The wax sheet paper is then laid out, enclosing both sides of the aluminum. And that's how the faceplate starts out. I'll tell you later about more to the subject of the energy crystal cell with using the pyro quartz crystal, and with using cell phone vibrators and induction wire to synchronize and recharge the energy crystal cell of the faceplate. So see that it goes exact. It can be deformed after the unit and shaped. It can be wrapped in a high temperature thermoplastic melt to cover it. I'll tell you that more in the later subjects. My name is Jermaine Morton. Goodbye.